And guys, well, first of all, everyone might notice that we are in a different location this week. We are finally trying something new because under the old gates over there by the field, we haven't
had the best luck lately.
No, we've had quite a few different elements we've had to battle through. So here we are in front of the pro shop. Sun's coming out. It's been feeling very much like fall. Really feels like football season.
I got jeans on for the first time in like 2 months.
I'm trying to soak the last little bit out of summer with my white and lily. But anyway, since we last sat down for this podcast, Patriots have lost Julian Edelman. Obviously, very, very significant. And for some reason, I was just telling you guys that I was looking into different stats about all the ACL injuries, because there's been a lot of talk about how there have been 24 ACL injuries since training camp opened in the NFL, and everyone's kind of all up in arms. There's a lot of noise about it because, of course, it is a lot of injuries, but I did just read a San Diego Tribune article citing a sports medical analyst, gave some numbers and said that the incidence of ACL injuries is actually not on the rise. It's pretty steady, that half of ACL injuries occur in preseason because the increased population of guys, 90 guys out there as opposed to 53. So that does make sense. Just kind of puts it in perspective. I just thought it was interesting that so many more of it, that each team suffers an average of 1.5 ACL tears per team per year. So there's a lot, but it's not, that has been steady throughout. It's not like ACL injuries are on the rise.
It is interesting, though, that seems to be like the one killer injury every year. It's every once in a while you'll have someone get a broken leg or a collarbone or some other kind of serious injury, but it seems like torn ACL is like when you think of season-ending injuries in professional sports, you think torn ACL, and it's strange that that's that one. I mean, I'm not a medical expert, but it is a little weird that it's always like that one tendon that is the thing that kind of derails so many seasons.
Kind of the nature of the sport in football, especially. You know, you guys cutting, you have guys making all sorts of maybe unnatural movements. You saw with Edelman. You see with a lot of these guys, it's just non-contact. They just plant their foot and they cut, and a lot of these guys are so shifty and so explosive that it almost they juke themselves out of their shoes, and it results in the ACL surgery.
As soon as you see non-contact, you always know it's bad news. I mean, it's the same thing with Dion Lewis. I believe that happened here a couple of years ago against the Redskins. You just saw him go down without anybody hitting him, and you automatically just say, "Oh man, that looks bad." And so no Julian Edelman for the entirety of this season.
Non-contact injury. This analyst also did say that high-speed cutting is where that ligament is most vulnerable. So it does kind of make sense. And like you mentioned, Teddy Bridgewater, it happening last season, a rough one. I did look up. I wanted to see, because I'm sure there are Patriots fans out there that are saying, "Hey, this happened on Ford Field in Detroit. Was there a divot? Is there grounds not kept as well as it should be?" But the new field turf, as opposed to AstroTurf, it is the same brand that the Patriots do have here in Foxborough. The Patriots did just upgrade their turf in this spring. The last time Detroit upgraded its turf was in 2013, so they have the classic HD version of field turf, which is for improved softness and durability. So it's a little older than the old turf here at Gillette Stadium, but not too much controversy there. Can't really, it's just a fluke.
Yeah, I don't think you can get too angry about the people who are in charge of Ford Field for this, but it is one of kind of the drawbacks of turf, that it is not quite as forgiving as grass. Some plays where you might maybe try to do a move on grass, you end up slipping out, fall down, try to do it on turf. The cleats just stick in there, and then it tweaks something. But I mean, there's benefits to both field surfaces, but it's definitely an unfortunate blow for the Patriots, to say the least.
Certainly, and everyone talks, guys, about how it's so much more killer to see a guy go down with a season-ending injury in preseason. Part of me gets that. I get the outlook on that, because I know technically it is a meaningless game. He didn't have to be in there, but I don't know. Like, I look at it as it's kind of a necessary evil. I don't know. My gripe with that argument is that, say, if this happened in the first or third quarter even of game one, like, you're still out Edelman for the entire season. It's like, is it that much more painful that it happened in preseason than game one?
The effect is the same. The result is the same. But I think the fact that if this had happened to, say, a guy who's maybe like 60th, 70th on the roster, a guy who needs to be out there if he wants to make this team, then it's a little bit more understandable, a little bit more easy to swallow. Edelman, everybody knew immediately that he was on this team. He was in zero danger of not making this team. He could have sat out this entire preseason, and he still would have made this team and probably would have been just as productive as he could be. I think that's what fans say. They're like, we don't need to see him out there in this game. It's like if Tom Brady got rolled up in that game, you don't need to see him on the field.
I get that Tom Brady talking about the importance of the preseason in terms of building up that just gelling together, building up the chemistry of the offense.
I think there are very few guys who kind of, like you see Rob Gronkowski, he gets the treatment where they're just going to avoid him in preseason. Obviously, he's playing this year. Yeah, he's playing this year too. But I think there are very few cases where guys would just will not play the preseason. You have to at least get your reps, and you have to, get in sync and at least get game action. Going from training camp, guys are already itching in joint practices. Guys are itching to play against other competition, and then the games are a different level. Yeah. So, stuff like this happens.
That's what I'm saying.
That's why it's the necessary evil.
You can't sit all the roster locks just because it's not really about them. Of course, Julian Edelman's not competing for a spot on the roster, but it's about not being stale.
It's a case where I can see why people get angry about it, because it's looking at it on the surface. One of the Patriots' best players is now out for the season because of a meaningless game. But on the other hand, like you said, you do need to get these reps. You're not going to sit your entire first-team offense for the entire preseason and then expect them to go out and be super fresh in week one. So it's a tough thing. And, I mean, Bill Belichick actually did say that this doesn't change the way he views the preseason. He didn't say that he wants the preseason to be shorter or wants their rules to be any different. But preseason's too long. For one thing about the preseason, they just need to completely get rid of this game that we're about to watch on Thursday, because this game, obviously, it means a lot to the guys who are fighting for jobs right now, but to everybody else, I mean, you can get these done in 3 weeks and you can avoid a lot of injuries, a lot of headache, a lot of boredom, a lot of everything, and just get right to the regular season. Make the preseason 3 weeks. That's my political platform.
I can see that. Again, I just wanted to see what your take, y'all's takes on it were, just because it's just a little pet peeve of mine when everyone's Twitter blows up with, it's so devastating to see a guy go down in preseason. Yes, it is. It's too bad to see an injury. I just look at it as it's too bad to see an injury occur at any time, especially if whether it's preseason or early on in the season. The Patriots are going to need Julian Edelman in the Super Bowl. And so if that's your mentality, it's like, why play him, I guess, at all until then, but you can't do that with every player. But anyway, I would agree with you on 3 weeks would be enough. But I do have a question for you guys. Now that Edelman is out for the season, the Patriots know that. Moving forward, their offense obviously loaded, especially the receiving core. But do they maybe now approach this fourth preseason game where normally you don't see much of the first teamers, probably wouldn't see any of Tom Brady? Do they maybe approach this differently in trying to find that replacement to take on Edelman's role, or seeing who's going to, fill those shoes, and then the domino effect of that, what other guys maybe going to now make the roster who wouldn't have?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think you're going to see pretty much status quo in this game, this fourth preseason game. I'm not expecting to see any of the big guns playing, and because they kind of, even if it was like you said, where they need some extra time to kind of get used to what the offense is going to look like without Julian Edelman. Edelman got hurt on the first series of this past game, and the first team offense played almost the entire first half, and they looked awesome. Like the Tom Brady led unit was pretty much flawless. I mean, he had 2 touchdown passes to Chris Hogan. He was spreading the ball around. We still really haven't seen Brandon Cooks get too involved in this preseason. I think that might kind of be by design. They're not really game planning anything for him. But everything that you needed to see, I think you saw last game, and now this game's going to be about put all these important people on the shelf, don't let them get hurt, and then just give plenty of time for those last 5 or 6 maybe players that still need to make a name for themselves and kind of secure a spot on this roster.
When you say that you don't think they're game planning for Cooks, do you mean more so that they don't want to reveal what they are planning for him?
It could be, that could be part of it. I mean, Bill Belichick has been very, very open about saying I believe it was in an interview with WEI yesterday where we throw around the dress rehearsal cliche a lot about the third preseason game, and he basically said, "What the hell are you talking about? Like, don't stop calling it a dress rehearsal. Like, yeah, everybody's playing, but we're not game planning at all. Like, it's not like we're watching film on the Lions. It's not like we're putting in special plays to beat Tavon Wilson or whoever's out there." So I think that they have big plans for Brandon Cooks this season, and I don't think we've even scratched the surface of seeing what they're going to be. It's been pretty.
That's what I was getting.
Yeah, it's been a very basic.
It's been a very basic. It's going to catch teams by surprise.
Yeah, because everybody's going to be keying on Cooks, especially now that Julian Edelman's out, and I'm sure they have plenty in the works for week one that they do not want to show just yet.
And I think that's kind of the silver lining with this injury is that considering it happened in the preseason, they have time now to kind of plan and plan for life without Edelman and go into the season. I think, like you said, I think that's more going to be in practice with practice reps, working things out, seeing which players go where, and kind of how that fits in. But obviously, they have a little bit of time, and this isn't like a mid-season injury that kind of really, takes a morale hit for the team. They can go into the season knowing what's in front of them. And then, a lot of different people are going to be asked to step up. You're going to have, they have a ton of weapons, obviously. We all know.
I do think that the additions they made to the roster this offseason really
paid off.
Seriously did.
Yeah.
Like, I think without obviously knowing, hindsight 2020, you know what happened in terms of the catch that Edelman made in that Super Bowl comeback. Of course, we know that, but erase that. If this had happened at the beginning of last season, I do think there would be a very different outlook and tone around here if you hadn't brought in the guys that you did.
The Brandon Cooks trade doesn't happen, then you're going in right now with Chris Hogan as your number one wide receiver. Yep. I think Chris Hogan's a very good player. I think he's going to do really well as the number two this year. I don't think he'll have really any problems filling that void left by Edelman. He's not going to be quite as involved as Edelman, I don't think, but he's still going to do well. But I don't think I would feel comfortable if going into a regular season if Chris Hogan was my number one bona fide top target. I think if that happens, you might be in a situation where the Patriots would be looking to maybe make a trade, maybe make some moves to shore up that position a little bit. They might still do that too. They might see who's out there. If they can get a reliable veteran at a relatively low price, then I think they could bring in another guy. But right now they're in good shape with the four players they have, plus Matthew Slater, plus the tight ends, plus all the running backs. Their offense is fine right now. Losing Julian Edelman is not going to cripple them the way that it did 2 years ago, I believe it was, when he was lost for the season.
I'm interested to see also how the running backs fit into that too. I know you might talk about this later, but they need a guy who can go over the middle and catch passes and kind of replace that that slot receiver in Edelman. And honestly, that could be one of the running backs, a guy like Dion Lewis, James White, even Rex Burkhead, saw him get involved in the passing game. Those guys might be called upon more Belichick talked earlier today about positional versatility, and you essentially they're running backs, but they can catch the ball and they can take that role.
Certainly, I'm thinking about it in two different ways that they could go in adjusting this offense. And 2 seasons ago, the Patriots had a ridiculous lack of run-pass balance where they hardly ran the ball.
Their running backs were also very, very poor that season.
Right. Now they have this loaded arsenal of running backs. So I'm feeling like either we could see maybe a shift to a more run-heavy offense, but if we do try to look at who could replace Edelman as that receiver who's making those kind of high danger cuts through the middle that Tom Brady trusts, knows, and can take those hits, because I know that Danny Amendola will probably be called upon a lot to fill Edelman's shoes, but he is in no ways near as durable as Edelman always has been. Think about those cuts that Edelman makes when he's catching the ball and just getting his head taken off, but he's fine and can take it. Yeah,
Danny Amendola, I do definitely think that he'll see an uptick in his snaps and in his targets and whatnot, but I don't know if it'll be as significant as maybe some people are predicting, because he is the closest thing to a Julian Edelman on this team with skill set wise and everything. He is really the next slot receiver on the depth chart. Move him up to where Edelman was, but yeah, like you said, not as durable. Does have an injury history. I mean, I don't want to say not as durable because Julian Edelman also does have an injury history as well.
It's pretty high bar, though.
Yeah, it is a pretty high bar.
Toughness.
I don't think he can take the punishment of having, what did Edelman have, 158 targets last year? That was insane. That's going to be the biggest thing.
It's like the ratio of like high danger targets to injuries is much higher.
All of these targets,
Amendola.
so many of them are coming across the middle. You see him just get smashed on a lot of these routes, pop back up, be whipping it back up. He's a guy who loves to get hit, which makes it kind of ironic and unfortunate that the fact that the one play that he did get hurt on was a non-contract injury. But yeah, I think you're definitely going to see more Danny Amendola, but you're also going to see, I guess it's kind of obvious, but all 4 of these receivers, I think, will definitely take on a larger role. Mm-hmm. I think Malcolm Mitchell is a guy who can really benefit from him. It's weird to say a guy can benefit from Julian Edelman being out, but he's a guy that I think could see a real uptick in his role, but he has to stay on the field. And then Brandon Cooks can really kind of transition what he had in New Orleans here. Chris Hogan, like I said before. It's tough to tell just with this Patriots offense, since there's so many weapons. It's hard to tell really to point to a single guy and be like, oh, yep, that's the guy. That's the new Julian Edelman.
Though a pass catching back to maybe do more of what Edelman was able to do on those short passes.
I think so. I think that's kind of like what Darren was saying before, and how you mentioned that maybe they'll become more of a run heavy team since they do have so many running backs. I don't see that, but I think they could become a more pass to running backs heavy team, if that makes any sense.
No, absolutely.
More of obviously James White got a ton of targets last year. He was second on the team behind Julian Edelman in targets, but Rex Burkhead can catch the ball, Deion Lewis can catch the ball. Mike Gillislee is really the only kind of pure power running back they have. All those other 3 guys are very versatile, so I think they'll definitely factor into this passing game. And just with so many weapons, it makes it so difficult for a defensive coordinator going into Patriots week to say, all right, we're going to take Deion Lewis out of this game, and the Patriots say, okay, cool, we'll throw it to any of these other 9 guys on the field. So it's going to be tough. Obviously, takes a hit without Edelman there, but yeah, they still have plenty of.
But a lot of the damage that Edelman would do would be the yards after the catch, not so much the long balls like the ones that Brady throws to Hogan or LaFell back when Brandon LaFell was here. You know, he was whatever, but you know what I mean. That different moments. Type of wide receiver. Yeah. But speaking of Brady, I want to talk to you guys about the impact that this could have on Brady. I don't know if you heard, but he is 40 years old.
Really?
I'm not sure if you know that, but
I thought he was 25.
40 years old, believe it or not. But Brady being 40 years old, obviously, him taking impact. I mean, honestly, I think he's more durable, it seems like, at this point than
pliable.
He's pliable.
Yes, malleable. that workout regimen. But really, I have been thinking about his release time has been very, very quick, and a lot of that has had to do with Edelman, is that he knows he can chuck it to Edelman even in traffic, and Edelman will find a way to catch the ball. If his time in the pocket is now getting maybe a little bit longer, if he's having to wait for guys or maybe doesn't trust his other receivers as much as he did Edelman, what kind of effect could this have on him in his season?
Well, I think the good news for him is you still have Gronk, and I think that's the one other guy besides Edelman who is Brady will just throw it to him. Yep. He'll just throw it to him if he's in double coverage. He trusts him to know where he is. Maybe Edelman even more though than Gronk, just because he's a lot shorter passes, kind of check downs in the middle. But I think that's a good point. He's going to have to develop a level of trust with a lot of guys who haven't been here very long. Obviously, Brandon Cooks and Rex Burkhead, their first years here. Malcolm Mitchell, second year. Like you said, I think he's going to be important to watch if they can kind of develop that trust. But I think Brady's one of the best in the league at avoiding contact and getting the ball at as quickly as possible. So it's just be another test for him.
Yeah.
What's your, Zach, confidence in this offensive line to be able to protect him for longer if that does end up being the case?
Very confident as long as it stays healthy. Those starting 5 that basically were in place for all of last season, they're all back this year, and I think if they're all on the field and healthy, I would be very confident in that offensive line. Obviously, with Brady being as old as he is, he's not the most mobile quarterback, even though he does take very good care of his body and all that stuff. He's still not going to take a second off of his 40 time or anything like that. So they did a fantastic job of protecting him last season. I think they can do the same. But if you do lose one of those tackles, I mean, Nate Solder's been a little banged up this summer. If you have to plug Cameron Fleming or Adrian Waddle in there, we've seen both of them look very shaky so far this preseason. So
that's an area where I feel like is so underrated when people have just the discussions about who can you not lose and affect the outcome of the Patriots season. It's often, before it was always the argument of, would you rather lose Edelman or Gronk? I'm trying to think I think it's really important not to lose an offensive lineman, which I don't know, ordinarily maybe would sound crazy, but I think that keeping Brady as healthy as possible and as
especially one of the tackles. I mean, especially Nate Solder and Marcus Cannon are both hugely important. Nate Solder more so just because he plays on the left side. If they have an injury to one of the interior guys, Ted Karras is a pretty solid backup. I think he could fill in there, maybe not be quite as effective as those three starters, but I think he can kind of hold the fort down. But right now it looks like the drop between the starting tackle and third tackle, swing tackle, whoever between Fleming or Waddle ends up earning that spot, it's pretty significant. I mean, either of those players I think are fine to have as a third tackle, jumbo tight end kind of guy who will come in maybe goal line situations or whatever. But if you're relying on him to be your primary protector of Brady's blind side against some of the talented, I mean, if they play the Texans in week 3, if you're having Adrian Waddle against J.J. Watt, I don't think that's the matchup that you want.
Not an ideal situation.
So health up front is, I mean, they were unusually healthy on the offensive line last season. So keeping that,
they won a Super Bowl.
And they won a Super Bowl. And you saw 2 years ago they were unusually unhealthy, and Brady almost got killed in the AFC Championship game. So keeping that starting five intact is going to be very, very important, I think.
And now two guys that maybe are fighting for a roster spot right now at the tight end position, James O'Shaughnessy and Jacob Hollister. What did you guys, I mean, we don't get to see all that much of practice. You can't really assess that way anymore. But what are you guys thinking in terms of maybe who makes it, who doesn't?
Yeah. I think an interesting point that people have raised recently is that they might just keep two tight ends. They might just keep Rob Gronkowski and Dwayne Allen and then use that third spot elsewhere on the roster, because there are a couple positions that could you could keep a 4 or 5 or 5 or 6. They might take that spot and give it to somebody else. I don't really think that's going to happen. I think one of those two makes the team. Right now I'd have to say it's O'Shaughnessy. I do believe that could change depending on what we see here Thursday. I think O'Shaughnessy has shown more so far. I guess he hasn't had a single game that's been as explosive as the one Jacob Hollister had here against the Jaguars, but he's a more experienced special teams player, and I think they're pretty comparable offensively skill-wise. Neither of them are particularly powerful blockers, but the fact that the Patriots cut Matt Langle over the weekend, I think, shows that they're leaning more toward a receiving threat than a guy like Langle, who's basically just a pure blocker. So in either of them, that's one of the battles this week that I think is still very much up for grabs. I think the benefit is if you keep O'Shaughnessy, you can try to sneak Hollister onto the practice squad, and you might be able to have success with that since he's been sort of invisible since that first preseason game. But yeah, definitely still a battle that's currently ongoing.
And I agree with you that I think they're definitely going to try to keep one of those guys, just in terms of with tight end depth. Obviously with Gronkowski, obviously you want him to be healthy the whole season, but you really can't bank on that. And Dwayne Allen is a veteran guy, but he's veteran too. He's a pretty old player, so I think it's going to be important to have that third tight end. Belichick, likes putting two tight ends in the field a lot too. So if one of those guys isn't available, he's going to want that option. I guess that's the one thing that the fourth preseason game is going to be good for is the third string tight end battle.
Oh yeah. Well, another
third string tight end, third string tackle. We got some real excitement going on in Jones Stadium right now.
Looking at another position that I think could be affected as part of the ripple effect of the Edelman injury. Zach, I mentioned this to you earlier. Cyrus Jones. It's time in the podcast for our weekly Cyrus Jones update.
I think we've talked about Cyrus Jones every single between the tackles.
Yeah, that's why I'm
saying
that is literally that guy. He gets his own 10-minute segment on our show every week. But I mean,
it's a lightning rod.
There's a lot to talk about, and I mean, people still want to know. It's like he's such a quandary.
Yeah, good word.
Yeah, good word.
But the importance of him really stepping up in the return game is even more important now, or is even higher now, because Edelman and Amendola have been guys that they've relied on when he is not able to return successfulonly. And obviously, I mean, I don't think you want to see Amendola back there now when you don't have Edelman anymore. And
I won't call Cyrus Jones a complete roster lock, but he is very, 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 very close right now. I mean,
has that changed? Not to interrupt you, sorry, but I did interrupt you. So
it's
because
okay.
Before you go on, just has that status changed?
The Edelman injury definitely increased his chances of sticking around, which I already think were pretty high, because I mean, for all the struggles he's had on defense, and he hasn't been great on defense this preseason, he's been very, very reliable in the return game. He's had some flashes of real athleticism, of real kind of making plays with the ball in his hands. But I think that's almost a bonus for the Patriots right now. They just want him to hold the ball and not make dumb decisions, and he's been able to do that throughout the preseason. I mean, we saw him drop. We've talked about it before. We saw him drop one punt, the very first punt he faced in training camp. I haven't seen him drop a kick or a punt since. So he's been
knock on wood.
Yeah. Knock on wood. No wood around us this time. Last time we tried to knock on wood, Julian Edelman ended up getting hurt.
If Cyrus Jones blows it this season, you come right back here, mark the minutes, and we can point right to Zach Cox.
He can. I mean, if he falls apart in this game, maybe the Patriots cut him. But I would be very, very surprised, because he's been their primary. He's been basically their only punt returner all preseason, and like you said, with Edelman is kind of their security blanket in there, and Danny Amendola. It basically goes Cyrus Jones, Danny Amendola, Julian Edelman, as Edelman kind of like he's the best punt returner on the team, but he's the one that they don't really want to use. Now, if they don't have Cyrus Jones, Danny Amendola is their starting punt returner basically to start the season. We were just talking about the fact that they want to limit his reps, not add an immense amount of workload on top of what he's already going to have with Edelman out as a wide receiver. So, long story short, I think Cyrus Jones is basically on this team now. He can still blow it for himself, but he's pretty much there.
He's also still he was a high draft pick, second round draft pick. I know Belichick's can cut anyone he wants, but I still think that they view it. This is a guy they can develop, and especially at corner in addition to the run game. So in the return game,
his draft stock and all of that is why we check in on him every week, because he is like
big name from Alabama.
To his credit, he's been probably one of the more surprising players in training camp, because when we came in training camp and the preseason, when we came into the summer, we had no idea what to expect from him, because he was awful in the spring, and he was obviously awful for most of last season. But this summer, he's been really good, and I think he deserves a roster spot for it.
I hope he gets consistent so that we can move on and give someone else a segment on this show, but we will see.
We'll be talking about how good he is then.
Exactly, but then that doesn't really warrant an entire segment, It's the quandaries that need a whole segment every week. As far as cornerback depth, what's the battle looking like there?
Ed, this is one of those positions that I was talking about before, that the Patriots kind of have a couple options on how many guys they want to keep. It's been pretty clear for a while that Stephon Gilmore, Malcolm Butler, Eric Rowe, Jonathan Jones are pretty much locked in there. Cyrus Jones now looks like he's pretty much in there as well. But since Cyrus Jones has been so poor defensively, do they want to keep another cornerback on top of that to kind of slide in either on some dime and quarter situations, or if someone above him gets hurt? Do you want to keep around Justin Coleman, somebody like Kenny Moore? Kenny Moore is an intriguing player, because he's kind of like Jonathan Jones last season. He's really stepped up on special teams, and he's also looked pretty good on defense too. So I still think either of those players still have a chance of making the team. Doug's pretty high on the idea that Justin Coleman's going to get traded, maybe to the Seahawks, because they were the team that had Justin Coleman before the Patriots claimed him off waivers from them. So he's a player that I still think has some value that they could move if they want to move. And it's going to be one of the questions to watch going into cut down day. How many will they just keep these 5 cornerbacks that we expect to make the team now, or is one of the other guys going to sneak in there too? And if it does, it could impact somewhere else. They might have to keep 1 fewer wide receiver, 1 fewer running back, 1 fewer linebacker. It has ripple effects all around the roster.
Well, Malcolm Butler, we've seen his struggles throughout this preseason game, sort of uncharacteristic.
Yeah, very strange.
Yeah, and I asked him today when we were all talking to him, I said, how would you assess your own overall preseason performance? And I thought he is a guy who does not say much. He really has the Patriot way down of not answering our questions. But he said, not my best. And I was surprised that he admitted that. But he's cognizant of it. And how does he turn this around?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is necessarily something that's too big of an issue, obviously.
Yeah, I preface by saying, like, I'm not talking about, I'm not expecting him to be cut or anything like that. I'm just saying for him.
Yeah.
He hasn't been himself.
And I think, if anything, it's motivation going into the regular season, kind of keep him in check. Obviously, with the whole contract situation this offseason and the trade situation, he's got a chip in his shoulder and something to play for. So, I think we saw against the Lions, he got a little bit. He let up a touchdown still, but he forced a fumble. He's kind of making. He can still make plays.
He was definitely better against the Lions than he was against the Texans. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is something that Week 4, he's not really going to be involved preseason, and then going to Week 1 with a clean slate, and maybe he'll use it as motivation.
He did say at the start of training camp that he does consider himself and Stephon Gilmore to be one of, if not the best, cornerback tandems in the league. So
they definitely have the potential, and Stephon Gilmore has looked awesome this preseason. So if Malcolm Butler, I'm not worried about him either. Like Darren was saying, I think he'll turn this around once the regular season comes. Maybe if he's still having troubles in week 2 or week 3, we can revisit this conversation. But right now, I think it's just a couple rough games for a guy that's pretty firmly entrenched in there as one of the Pat's best players.
All right. Well, even given everything that's gone on in the past week or so, still the only real area of concern, if you will, for the Patriots, the pass rush. Said to you earlier, Zach, it's been a revolving door of defensive ends here at Gillette Stadium. Just last week, we were saying how Bill Belichick called out Caleb Kidder as a standout against the Texans.
That was weird.
And he is now gone. He's been cut. The Jets have picked up Coney Ealy. So how do you think this will be shaping up?
I mean, we also talked last week about how Coney Ealy looked pretty good against the Texans. I mean, obviously he was playing very deep into that game, which isn't a good sign for a kind of veteran who is expected to have a more significant role in the team. But we were saying, he's looking promising. I mean, he had a really rough start to camp, but maybe he's starting to turn it around. Maybe we'll actually see him get in there with some of that first team defense, get some snaps with the starters there. Then he came out against Detroit, didn't play till the second half, basically played until deep in the fourth quarter, and then he was cut the next day. So obviously didn't work out in New England, as Bill Belichick said. He basically said exactly that when we asked him about it. He said not for lack of effort, not for lack of trying or anything. It just didn't work out from either side. They got rid of him. Obviously, I was actually a little bit surprised that he was picked up so quickly and there was so much interest in him, because I think 10 teams put in a waiver claim on him, which is a little surprising, being a player that really was a pretty big disappointment here. But so now Coney Ealy out of the picture, Caleb Kidder out of the picture, which we all kind of expected anyway. Nobody really thought he was going to make the team. So it's still a bit of a mystery what exactly this front seven is going to look like in week 1. I do think you'll see Dante Hightower on at one defensive end opposite from Trey Flowers, Trey Flowers. He's been practicing with the defensive ends ever since he came back onto the field. Was it a week or 2 ago now? I think you're going to see him fill that spot that Harvey Longie's been playing throughout the preseason. And then at linebacker, you still don't really know, because Shea McClellan hasn't been around lately much. I do think you'll see Harvey Longie in the mix. I think you'll see Kyle Van Noy in the mix. Landon Roberts, we were a little shaky on him at first. Looks like he'll probably make the team with some of these injuries and cuts. And then there's one guy, and Adam Butler too, who's really come along strong. I think he's almost basic. You could almost consider him a roster lock at this point, even though he's an undrafted guy who came in with very little fanfare. So there's a lot of bodies there. There's a lot of talented
Marquise
players.
Flowers, add him to the mix.
Marquise Flowers.
Yep.
I've been wanting to call him
A
Marquise.
couple of flowers
I've
on
almost,
the ends, setting the edge out there.
I've mistakenly called him Marquise Daniels like 6 or 7 times today. He's the only Marquise that I have in my mind for some reason. But yeah. he's in the mix now too. I think he'll probably be more of a special teams presence, which he was in Cincinnati, but you could see him in that defensive mix as well. So there's a lot of players, a lot of bodies still kind of looking to see exactly where they all fit in. And I think it'll be different week by week.
You mentioned Landon Roberts. This is something, whoops, my mic flag fell. Landon Roberts is a guy we touched on last week, but I was saying I think that his standing with the team or his spot on the roster bubble could be affected now if Dante Hightower is tasked more with setting the edge and covering and pass rushing.
Exactly. He's
a guy who is a key cog in run defense, and Landon Roberts, that is his strength. I remember when Jamie Collins was traded, we looked at some of the numbers, and Landon Roberts was actually more effective in run defense. Of course, Jamie Collins was such an effective pass defender, but his run defense is pretty strong.
He's a fantastic run defender. When he can just pin his ears back and just fly into a hole, he's really fun to watch. I mean, he's one of the more he's great when he's playing aggressive, when he's flying to the ball. When he has to kind of read and react or cover or anything like that, he still kind of struggles a little bit. But that's which is the reason why that I didn't think his roster spot was necessarily guaranteed as recently as about a week or so ago. But with like I said, with the injuries, with the cuts that they've made. Excuse me.
It's really windy out here. It's like just wind.
Adverse conditions out here.
Adverse conditions. But I think, especially now with Dante Hightower looking like he's going to be playing more on the edge, I think you'll see David Harris as that starting middle linebacker, and then Landon Roberts probably as his backup, or maybe vice versa, depending on the situation. But yeah, his roster spot, not completely safe, but I think he's a fair bet to make the team at this point.
All right, well, the wind is really picking up, and guys, this has been a great talk, and I'm just thinking to myself, it's not even like that last year was my rookie year. Like, I've been out here covering the Patriots for a few years now, but I will say this is my second week in a row wearing braids. I think the braids are here to stay. I finally learned my lesson. Braid it back, then I don't, because imagine if I had my hair.
Well, last year we had
mouth is drying out. My hair would be just like
I got to start the braids
everyone.
too. Or something. I don't know.
He's getting there.
If you're gonna
last year we had the studio though. We didn't have to worry about the wind in the studio. Now we're out in the elements, bringing you the video podcast. So
and we're adjusting. The more we do this, it's like getting into the season, getting into the swing of it. I have braids. We moved locations, so we don't have mic checks this week. That was awesome that we could have a conversation and actually hear each other.
No
as
Kenny
always.
Chesney this week.
This has been very fun. I'm glad. Thank you all for tuning in to Between the Tackles. And right now, I want to throw to an interview I was able to do with Gary Myers. He was the author of the Brady Manning book and now has written My First Coach, Inspiring Stories of Quarterbacks and Their Dads. And he does have some interesting insight on Tom Brady's father, Tom Sr. And guys need to hear what he had to say about what perhaps, I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but I'm not even trying to bring up the whole Deflategate thing, but Brady's perhaps innocence because of some certain interactions with his father. So take a look.
Interesting. Yeah.
Michaela Vernava joined on the line by Gary Myers, author of My First Coach, Inspiring Stories of NFL Quarterbacks and Their Dads. Gary, I want to start off by asking you, what inspired you to take an in-depth look at the relationships between quarterbacks and their fathers?
Well, I was really inspired by the relationship I've had with my son, who is 22 years old, and he just graduated from the University of Michigan. But from the time he started playing T-ball when he was 4 or 5 years old up until the time he started playing high school baseball, I was his coach. And we just really bonded over baseball. And when he read my Brady versus Manning book, he was reading about the relationship that Tom has with his dad, Tom Sr., and Peyton has with Archie. And he suggested to me that and that was the part of the book that he loved the most. And he suggested to me, you find like 8 or 10 quarterbacks from different generations and write a book about the different relationships, each of them had with their dads and how that impacted them into the player and the person that he became. And I thought that was a great idea, that it would be something that we can really, market to middle school and high school boys and girls and their parents and, football fans in general. So that's how the idea came about, and it just came out recently. So I'm really excited about it.
Well, Tom Brady's family has been very much in the news within the past year, given what his mom is going through. What was it that you found that there is between him and Tom Sr. that makes their relationship special?
Well, just that, and I know it's kind of a cliche and when people refer to their fathers and sons this way, but they really are best friends. And they've had a very close relationship Tom's entire life. He's the youngest of 4 children. He has 3 older sisters. And Tom Sr. Was kind of hoping that Tom would go to the University of California when he was getting out of high school, because it's only about a half hour away. It came down to Cal and the University of Michigan. And Tom Sr. didn't want to influence Tom where he went to school, because if it didn't work out, he didn't want to feel responsible for the decision. And when Tom decided to go to Michigan, Tom Sr. was so upset that he'd be separated from Tom that he actually needed to go to counseling for a couple of months to help him deal with the separation anxiety he was experiencing. And, that certainly is fairly unique. And he found that the counseling really helped. And Tom has never moved back to California. He stayed, playing for the Patriots all these years. But Tom, and for a long time, his wife would travel to all the Patriot road games. Even when he's not playing at Michigan, his parents would go to the home and road games just to support him. So they've had, just a wonderful relationship.
To have to go through counseling at that point of separation, I feel like must speak to how involved Tom Sr. was with Tom when he was growing up. How much did you find that Tom Sr. impacted Tom Brady's development as a quarterback?
I'm not sure how much, he had to do with, the on-the-field stuff. I do know that he was, incredibly supportive of him. Tom was a really good baseball player, too. In fact, as people in the New England area know, he was drafted by the Montreal Expos. He was a catcher, a left-handed hitting catcher, and he was a really good player that if he had not committed to football, he probably would have been drafted. I think he was drafted like in the 16th to 18th round. If he had not been a football player, he would have been drafted much higher and, potentially could have been a major league player. So when Tom was getting ready to make a decision on where he was going to school, Tom Sr. was very involved in just, helping him sort through the decision-making process. But like I mentioned before, the ultimate decision was left up to Tom.
Did you get any inclination as to whether Tom Sr. would have rather seen his son play football or pursue baseball?
No, in situations like that, some fathers, steer their kids in one direction or another. I didn't really get the impression that Tom Sr. did, and that obviously he made the right decision. The way things have turned out, of course, when he was 17 or 18 years old, there was no way of knowing it at that point. But, seeing what Tom's passion is for football and the leadership aspect of it, I can understand why in baseball he was a catcher, because catcher also is very much a leadership position. But I'd have to imagine, although I never saw him play baseball, that he was a much more talented football player, and that's, why he made the decision to go, stick with football.
Well, when the whole Deflategate saga went down, of course, in true Patriot fashion, neither Tom nor Bill Belichick or anyone really from within the organization was very vocal about it. Shocker there. But
right.
Tom's father did come out on the radio and was defending him. What was your reaction to that, knowing what you know about their relationship?
You're right. I mean, Tom Sr. probably said some things that he I'm not going to say he regretted, but maybe that Tom regrets that his father said. At one point, he called Roger Goodell a liar on the radio. And I remember having a conversation with Tom Sr., and I said, you know, when you get on the phone with your son after you call Roger Goodell a liar, when stuff is still, you know, very much a fluid situation and, you know, decisions still have to be made. I said, what's the reaction of Tom? And he said to me, it was actually kind of funny. He goes, Dad, you're not doing me any favors. And I think at that point, you know, Tom Sr. kind of put a moratorium on saying controversial things until the situation ultimately, you know, got resolved. But I always felt during that period of time that Tom Sr. was saying a lot of the things that Tom was thinking, but that Tom couldn't say himself. And that's just my gut feeling out of all this, because his father was very outspoken, defending his integrity and his character and just that whole situation where he completely absolved his son of any wrongdoing. And, you know, in the New York Daily News, in the columns that I write, you know, from the very, very beginning, I wrote how, you know, ridiculous the whole thing was and what a sham the whole investigation or just the whole process was. And it seems it took a while, but, you know, many of the media who were convicting Tom, so to speak, of any wrongdoing in Deflategate, I think they eventually came around and realized that the whole thing was a waste of time.
As a father, can you relate to that in any way in wanting to stick up for your son? And is that in some way maybe a testament to Tom Brady's perhaps innocence if his father was willing to go to bat for him like that? Or do you think that a father would go to bat for their kid even if he knew he was lying?
You know, that's a great question. And the way I would answer it is this. I never lied to my father. I never looked my father in the eye and told him a lie. And I get the impression that Tom, the last thing he would do would look his father in the eye and lie to him, especially something so public. You know, if Tom did anything wrong along the way, I just think that he would have told his father. I also know that he'd looked Robert Kraft in the eye, and he considers Robert, you know, his East Coast father, so to speak. And he looked him in the eye and told him, you know, he did nothing wrong. And, you know, maybe it's just because I know what my relationship was with my father and I know what my relationship is with my son, that there's no lying involved in those relationships, where if we did something wrong, you know, we admit it and try to fix it and move on. And so in this case, I know a lot of people were feeling that Tom Sr. was just covering up for Tom. And of course, a father is going to take his son's side and even, you know, stretch the truth to defend him. But in this case, maybe I'm naive in this regard. I don't think so. But I truly believe Tom Sr. when he was telling me that his son did nothing wrong. And maybe over the course of time, there'll be more details that come out that prove that he wasn't telling the truth. But at this point, there's been no indication that I can come up with that the whole story that the NFL eventually, you know, presented would point the finger that Tom did anything wrong. And a lot of my why I came to that conclusion was because in my conversation with Tom Sr., I just found him so forthcoming that it's hard for me to believe that he wasn't telling the truth.
Well, that's very interesting insight, Gary. I appreciate you sharing that with us. And I want to encourage everyone to go out and read My First Coach, Inspiring Stories of NFL Quarterbacks and Their Dads. Really interesting stuff. Thank you, Gary.
Well, thank you very much for having me on.